It was 7:40 in the morning, and my tractor was leaving without me not being driven, being hauled. A flatbed trailer sat half on my driveway, half on the street, and two men in matching polo shirts with the HOA logo stitched on the chest were running a tow strap around the rear axle of my John Deere like they'd done this 100 times before. Maybe they had. I stepped off my porch and my work boots, coffee still in my hand. She was already there, standing 6 feet from the tractor clipboard, pressed to her chest, an orange notice form already filled out and waiting. Karen didn't look up when I walked toward her, not at first. She was watching the men work with the calm expression of someone supervising a furniture delivery. I said, "Stop." The men paused. Karen looked up. "Mr. Alderman," she said, her voice flat and professional. "Your equipment has been cited under HOA. Commercial and agricultural machinery is prohibited storage on residential lots. We're relocating it to the HOA maintenance yard pending your compliance filing." She held out the orange notice the way a bank teller slides a withdrawal slip across a counter. "Transaction inconvenience, nothing personal." I did not take it. I told her to get those men off my property. I told her to remove that strap from my tractor. I told her that nobody, not the HOA, not the board, not anyone carrying a clipboard, had the authority to remove personal property from a private residential lot. Karen tilted her head slightly the way people do when they have already decided the conversation is over. "You had 72 hours to remove it voluntarily, sir. You chose not to respond to the notice. The HOA has the authority to enforce compliance with community standards. That's in the governing documents you signed." Then she nodded at the crew. They kept working. I stood there and watched the tow strap tighten. I watched the front wheels of a machine I'd owned for 19 years lift off the ground. I watched it roll backward onto a flatbed trailer while a woman with a clipboard stood on my driveway and looked at her phone. Before the truck pulled away, Karen handed me the orange notice one more time. This time I took it. I looked at the citation number printed at the top, HOA-2024-118. I looked at the section cited 12.4. I looked at the line at the bottom handwritten in Karen's careful block letters, "Equipment relocated to HOA maintenance facility. This is HOA property until compliance is confirmed." The truck turned left out of my driveway and headed up the street. Karen said, "A compliance filing form is available on the HOA website. Once you submit it and pay the outstanding balance, we can discuss return of the equipment." She clicked her pen shut. "Have a good morning." She walked back to her car. Board member Davis, who had been standing near the mailbox the whole time and hadn't said a single word, followed her. Neither of them looked back. I stood at the end of my driveway for a long moment. The street was quiet. A neighbor across the way was watching from behind a curtain. I caught the movement, the shadow stepping back when I turned their direction. Nobody came outside. Nobody said anything. I looked at the orange notice in my hand one more time, section 12.4. I'd read the HOA's governing documents twice in the past 3 days after the first warning arrived. I knew every section number in those bylaws. I'd read them the way a man reads something when he suspects someone is lying to him, slowly twice with a highlighter. There was no section 12.4. I went inside. I poured the rest of my coffee. I stood at the kitchen counter for a minute thinking. Then I walked to my home office, opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, and pulled out a manila envelope I hadn't opened in over a decade. The paper inside was county stamped, slightly yellowed at the edges, dated 1987. I didn't read it yet. I just set it on the desk. Then I picked up the phone and called the sheriff. Not the non-emergency line, his cell. We'd been neighbors going on 30 years, and what I needed wasn't a report number. What I needed was for him to come read something with me. If Karen had known whose property she was standing on that morning, and more importantly, what was recorded about that property at the county clerk's office, she would have driven right past my driveway without slowing down. I bought this land in 1987 when it was still just land, no subdivision, no clubhouse, no welcome packet with a glossy photo of a community pool on the cover. Just 11 acres at the edge of what the county map still listed as rural residential, a gravel road, a tree line to the north, and a lot of quiet. I paid cash for the raw acreage, built the house myself over 2 years with help from my brother-in-law and a framing crew I hired out of the county seat. By the time I poured the front porch, I knew every square foot of this property the way you only know land you've worked with your hands. The tractor came later, 1994. I bought it used from a retiring farmer named Gus Pelletier, who was moving to Florida to be near his grandchildren. John Deere 4040, a little beat up, good bones. I gave him $6,200 and shook his hand and drove it home on the county road at 11 miles an hour with my hazards on. It was good for clearing brush along the back fence line, maintaining the drainage ditch that ran along the eastern edge of the property, moving gravel, pulling stumps, useful work maintenance work. The kind of work a man does when he owns land and wants to keep it right. Nobody called it commercial. Nobody called it anything. It sat where it sat, did what it did, and for 15 years not a single person in this neighborhood gave it a second look. Because for most of those 15 years there was no HOA. The subdivision formed around me in 2003. A developer named Callaway bought the adjacent parcels, the old Bremer farm to the south and the vacant lots on the east side of the road, and over the next 2 years carved them into 90 residential lots. New houses went up fast, young families moved in. It changed the character of the road, but that's the nature of things. And most of the new neighbors were decent people who kept to themselves. In 2004, I received a letter from Callaway Development asking me to voluntarily join the newly formed Sycamore Ridge Homeowners Association. I went to one informational meeting. It seemed reasonable enough. I signed the CC&RS paperwork without reading every page, which is the kind of thing you do when you've lived somewhere for 17 years without a single dispute, and you see no reason to expect one. That was a mistake I've thought about many times since. For the first 15 years of the HOA's existence, things were quiet. Lawn ordinances, paint color approvals, the occasional dispute about a fence line, the normal friction of people living close together. I paid my annual dues. I went to maybe 3 meetings total. The HOA was a background thing like homeowners insurance. You knew it existed. You didn't think about it much. Then, 3 years ago, Karen was elected HOA president. I don't know enough about how that happened to explain it fully. What I know is that within 6 months of her taking office, the notice volume across the neighborhood tripled, not warnings, formal violation notices. Each one citing a specific section, each one carrying a fine schedule. Unapproved garden borders, wrong shutter colors, basketball hoops left in driveways past 8 p.m., mailboxes that didn't match the community standard outlined in a document most residents had never seen before. The fines started at $50 and climbed fast. Most neighbors paid and didn't ask questions. 2 families received formal liens on their properties after disputes over fence height and driveway materials. One family, the Tremaines, who had lived on the street since 2006, sold their house and moved the following spring. I watched them load the moving truck from my front window and thought, that's a family that just got pushed out of their home over a property line argument. My tractor received no notice during any of this. It had sat in the same position on the south side of my property since 2009, visible from the street but not obtrusive. No one had ever complained. No one had ever asked me about it, not in 15 years until 6 weeks ago when the first warning appeared in my mailbox. A single sheet of paper informing me that my John Deere constituted commercial and agricultural machinery prohibited under Section 12.4 of the HOA CC&RS, and that I had 30 days to remove it voluntarily before formal enforcement would begin. I read it twice. Then I went inside and pulled up the HOA's governing documents on my computer. I read through all 9 sections. I looked for Section 12.4. It wasn't there. I checked the HOA website. Same document, same 9 sections, nothing beyond 9.7. I set the notice on my desk and thought about it for 2 days before I did anything else. That evening, the same evening, the flatbed took my tractor up the street. I went to the filing cabinet in my home office and opened the bottom drawer. The manila envelope was where I'd left it probably 11 years ago, maybe more. Inside, the original deed to the property recorded and stamped by the county clerk's office in August of 1987. 2 pages of legal description, a plat reference number, the signature of the previous owner, and a county recorder's seal in blue ink. I found the paragraph I half remembered existing. I read it. It a second time more slowly. Then I put the deed back in the envelope, set it on the desk next to the orange notice, and sat down. There are moments when you realize A fight you didn't ask for is already tilted in your favor if you're patient enough to let it play out correctly. This was one of those moments. I left the envelope on the desk and went to make dinner. The sheriff could wait until morning. 3 days before the flatbed showed up, Karen knocked on my door. It was a Tuesday morning just past 9 o'clock. I'd seen her car parked at the curb from the kitchen window, the white Audi with the HOA parking permit hanging from the mirror, which I'd always found slightly ironic given how aggressively the board enforced guest parking rules for everyone else. I set down my coffee and answered the door before she knocked a second time. She was dressed like she had somewhere important to be afterward, blazer lanyard with her HOA president badge, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She smiled the way people smile when they've already made a decision and are now performing the courtesy of informing you about it. "Good morning, Mr. Alderman. I wanted to hand-deliver this personally." She held out the violation notice. I took it. Printed at the top, HOA violation notice number HOA-2024-118. Below that, the citation. Storage of commercial or agricultural machinery on residential lots in violation of HOA CC&RS, Section 12.4. Below that, the remedy. Remove the equipment from the property within 72 hours, or the HOA would arrange removal at the owner's expense and assess daily fines beginning on day 4. I read it twice standing in my doorway. "I'd like to see the section," I said. "I'm sorry, Section 12.4. I'd like to see it in the governing documents." Karen tilted her head slightly. "It's in the CC&Rs. You have a copy on file from when you joined the community. The current version is also posted on the HOA website." I told her to hold on and went inside. I came back with my copy of the HOA CC&Rs, the document I'd signed in 2003, printed and bound with a plastic cover. I opened it and held it out to her. "Walk me to Section 12.4, I said. She looked at the binder without touching it. "The bylaws have been updated since 2003, Mr. Alderman. The current version supersedes that copy." "Then show me the current version." "It's on the website." "I'll check tonight," I said. "If I find Section 12.4 clearly posted and currently enacted, I'll call you tomorrow morning. If I don't, I'd like a written copy of the specific provision and the board minutes from the meeting where it was adopted." Karen's smile stayed in place, but something behind it shifted. She told me that the HOA's governing documents were maintained by the board and that members were welcome to submit formal written requests for records through the proper channels. She said the 72-hour compliance window had already been gone. She said she hoped we could resolve this amicably. Then she left. I went inside and opened the HOA website on my laptop, found the Governing Documents tab, downloaded the current CC and RS dated 2021, opened it, and went straight to the table of contents. The document ran from Section 1 through Section 9.7, no Section 10, no Section 11, no Section 12. I scrolled through the full document anyway, page by page, in case the sections were nothing. I searched the PDF for 12.4 using the find function. 0 results. I searched for agricultural. 0 results. I searched for commercial machinery. 0 results. I took a screenshot of the document with the date and time visible in the corner and another of the table of contents page showing where the document ended. The next morning, I called the HOA's listed contact number and asked the administrator, a part-time woman named Dolores, who sounded genuinely uncomfortable throughout the conversation, for a copy of the CC&Rs, specifically including Section 12.4 in writing via email. She said she'd pass the request along. 3 hours later, an email arrived from the HOA's official address with a PDF attachment. I opened it. It was the same 2021 document I'd already downloaded. Section 12 did not exist. I printed the email, the attachment, and both screenshots. I put them in a folder. I labeled the folder with the date and the citation number. That evening, Karen called me directly. Her tone was different on the phone, less managed. She said the board had discussed my request and that the HOA's position was that Section 12.4 was a valid and currently enforceable provision of the community's governing standards. She said that regardless of what any previous version of the document showed, the HOA had the authority to enforce community standards and that my equipment was in clear violation. I asked her one more time calmly to provide the board meeting minutes from the session where Section 12.4 was adopted. I told her I wasn't asking to be difficult. I simply wanted to understand the legal basis for the citation before I acted on it. There was a pause. Then Karen said, "Non-compliance after the 72-hour window will result in a fine of $500 per day and a formal lien filing on your property. The HOA has pursued foreclosure referrals in the past. I want you to understand that this is a serious matter." I said, "I understand." She hung up. I wrote down the time 7:14 p.m. and the substance of the call word for word as best I could reconstruct it while it was fresh. I added the note to the folder. Then I went back to the CC&RS document and read every section one more time, slowly looking for anything that could possibly be interpreted as Section 12.4 under a different label or numbering. There was nothing. There had never been anything. She was citing a rule that didn't exist, threatening a lien on a man's home over a rule that had never been voted into law. And somewhere in that HOA maintenance yard, my tractor was sitting on a flatbed she'd already arranged before she knocked on my door that Tuesday morning. The 72 hours were almost up. The tow truck was probably already booked. The morning after they took the tractor, I walked next door to see Earl. Earl Hutchins is 78 years old, retired postal supervisor, lived on this street since 2005, grows tomatoes in raised beds along his back fence every summer, and has never once bothered anyone about anything. He was in his driveway when I came around the corner sweeping pine needles off the concrete with a push broom, and he stopped when he saw me. "Heard them take it this morning," he said. "I'm sorry, Walter. I told them I was working on it." Then I asked him if he'd received any HOA notices recently, any citations referencing a specific section number. He leaned the broom against the garage door and went inside. Came back 2 minutes later with a folded piece of paper. HOA violation notice, different citation number, different offense. The color of his storage shed door apparently didn't match the community standard for accessory structure exteriors. But the section cited at the top was the same one Karen had used on me, Section 12.4. Earl had paid the fine $80 6 weeks ago. He'd repainted the shed door the following weekend. He hadn't questioned the section number because it hadn't occurred to him to question it. "I figured they updated the rules again," he said. "They're always updating something." I asked if I could make a copy of the notice. He said, "Take it." He didn't want it in his house. I spent the next 2 days walking the neighborhood quietly, not making a scene, not telling anyone what I was building, just knocking on doors, asking neighbors if they'd received any citations lately and whether I could look at them. People were cautious at first. The HOA had cultivated a particular atmosphere in this neighborhood over the past 3 years, and part of that atmosphere was the understanding that complaining openly carried its own risks. But most people talked once they understood I wasn't there to cause them trouble. By the end of the second day, I had notices from 5 households. A raised garden bed on Sycamore Lane, Section 12.4. An RV parked along the side of a house on the corner lot, Section 12.4. A basketball hoop in a driveway on Ridgewood Court, Section 12.4. A flagpole that apparently exceeded the maximum height for residential lot features, Section 12.4. Every citation, different offense, same section. The fines ranged from $80 to $340. Every family had paid. None of them had questioned the section number. None of them knew it didn't exist. I made copies of all 5 notices dated and labeled and added them to the folder alongside my own documentation. Then I called the county clerk's office. Public records law in this state gives residents access to HOA board meeting minutes when those minutes have been filed with the county as part of a recorded community governance structure. Sycamore Ridge had been filing their minutes since 2004. I submitted a written request for all board meeting minutes from 2020 through the present. 3 days later, a packet arrived in the mail, 47 pages photocopied and stapled in chronological order. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and read through all of it. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect: budget approvals, landscaping contracts, pool maintenance schedules, routine compliance reports. Then I reached the October 2022 meeting minutes. Agenda Item 7, proposed addition of Section 12.4 to CC&RS governing documents. Subject prohibition of commercial and agricultural machinery storage on residential lots. Motion introduced by Karen, seconded by Board Member R. Davis. Discussion followed. Vote called. 2 in favor, 3 opposed. Motion failed. Below that, a single additional note in the minutes. President Beaumont requested the item be revisited at the following month's meeting. I flipped to the November 2022 minutes, then December, then every meeting through the present. Section 12.4 never appeared on another agenda. There was no second vote. There was no amendment. There was no adoption. Karen had proposed the rule in October 2022. The board had voted it down, and then at some point between that failed vote and the present day, she had simply started citing it anyway on notice forms and violation letters and phone calls to residents who trusted that if the HOA said a rule existed, it probably did. 6 families over $1,000 in collected fines, 1 tractor sitting in an HOA maintenance yard, all of it under a provision that had never legally existed. I set the meeting minutes on the table and sat with that for a moment. There's a particular quality to the feeling of having suspected something and then watching the documentation confirm it. Not satisfaction exactly, more like the click of a lock turning over. Everything becomes very clear and very still. I added the minutes to the folder. I labeled the relevant page with a post-it note, October 2022, vote failed 3-2, never readopted. The next morning I called the county assessor's office. I had one straightforward question. Did my property parcel number 1-4-228-0047 carry any recorded easements or pre-existing land use designations from the original deed filing? The woman who answered put me on hold for about 4 minutes. When she came back, she said yes, the parcel record showed agricultural use language attached to the 1987 deed tied to the original county land use classification at the time of recording. She said the notation indicated the language was part of the recorded deed itself, not a separate easement filing. She recommended I pull the original deed from the county archive if I needed the specific wording. I already had it. I went to the home office, opened the bottom drawer, took out the manila envelope. I unfolded the deed on the desk and found the paragraph I'd read 2 nights ago. Paragraph 7, subsection B. I read it again slowly, the way you read something when you want to be absolutely certain of every word. Then I read it a 3rd time. I sat back in my chair. Outside through the window, I could see the empty space on the south side of my property where the tractor had sat for 15 years. The concrete pad, the oil stain, in the shape of nothing in particular. Then I called the sheriff. 2 days after the flatbed left my driveway, I drove to the HOA management office. It was housed in the back wing of the community clubhouse, a building I had watched go up in 2005 on land that used to be an open field where kids from the new subdivision flew kites on weekends. The management suite had its own entrance off the parking lot with a placard next to the door that said Sycamore Ridge HOA Administrative Office in the same font as all the neighborhood signs. I pushed the door open at 10 o'clock in the morning without calling ahead. Karen was already there. So was Board Member Davis, standing off to the side near the window with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who had been told to be present but not to speak. The HOA's part-time administrator, Dolores, sat at a desk in the corner and did not make eye contact when I walked in. Through the window behind Davis, I could see the HOA maintenance yard. My John Deere was parked against the back fence. Someone had put a bright orange tag on the steering column. Karen gestured to the chair across from her desk. I sat. She opened a manila folder thinner than mine, considerably less well organized, and slid a document across the desk toward me. 3 pages stapled in the upper left corner. At the top, in bold, Sycamore Ridge, HOA Compliance and Release Agreement. In order to secure the return of the equipment currently held in HOA custody, Karen said, "We're asking you to sign this agreement. It outlines the conditions for release." I picked it up and read it. The conditions were 4 in number. 1, I would sign a written acknowledgement that my John Deere tractor had been stored on my residential lot in violation of HOA's CC&RS, Section 12.4. 2, I would pay the accumulated daily fine balance of $2,800, representing the fines assessed since the original 72-hour compliance window had expired. 3, I would commit in writing to removing all agricultural and commercial equipment from my property within 30 days of the agreement signing. 4, I would agree not to pursue any legal claim complaint or civil action against the HOA, its officers, its board members, or its agents in connection with this matter. All 4 conditions on 3 pages. A pen sat uncapped on the desk beside the document placed there before I arrived. I read all 3 pages. I read the fine print at the bottom of page 3. Then I set the document down and looked at Karen. Is Section 12.4 currently an enacted provision of the HOA CC&RS? I asked. It is, she said. Can you show me the board meeting minutes from the session where it was adopted? Something moved behind Karen's eyes. Not panic, not yet. More like the micro-adjustment a person makes when they realize a conversation is not going where they plan. Board meeting minutes are internal governance records, she said. Member access outside of a formal written petition process is not standard procedure. I submitted a written request through the county clerk, I said. I received the minutes packet 4 days ago. A pause. Dolores in the corner stopped typing. Then you have what you requested, Karen said. Her voice was still even. The agreement in front of you represents the HOA's position. We're asking you to sign it today. I picked up the document one more time and looked at Condition 4, the clause releasing the HOA from any legal action, and then I placed it back on the desk and pushed it across toward her slowly. The uncapped pen rolled slightly toward the edge. I won't be signing this, I said. Karen's expression didn't collapse. It tightened the way a fist tightens. She glanced at Davis, who looked at the floor. Mr. Alderman, her voice dropped half a register. I want you to understand the position you're putting yourself in. The lien currently filed against your property will be escalated to a foreclosure referral within 30 days if this matter remains unresolved. The HOA has pursued that process before and obtained favorable outcomes. You are not in a position to fight this effectively on your own. I stood up. I appreciate your time, I said. I picked up the unsigned agreement, folded it in thirds, and put it in my jacket pocket. Karen's eyes tracked it, but she didn't say anything. Davis didn't say anything. Dolores in the corner was very still. I walked out to my truck, drove home, sat down at the kitchen table. In front of me, I laid out everything in the order I'd collected it. The original HOA violation notice, HOA-2024-118, the CC&RS document with its 9 sections that ended at 9.7, the timestamp screenshots, the admin email with the same incomplete document, my handwritten call log from the 7:14 p.m. Phone call the neighbor, notices from 5 households. The county clerk's minutes packet open to the October 2022 page with the failed vote, the county assessor's written confirmation, and the original deed unfolded to paragraph 7, subsection B. And now the unsigned compliance form, smooth flat on top of the pile. I looked at it all for a few minutes. Then I picked up my phone and called the sheriff's personal cell, not the department line. His cell, the one I'd had since we used to watch football together on Sunday afternoons before his schedule made that impossible. He picked up on the 3rd ring. We talked for 20 minutes. I told him what had been taken, how it had been taken, and what I'd found in the process of trying to get it back. I told him about the minutes. I told him about the compliance form and Condition 4. Then I told him about the deed. He asked me to text him a photograph of paragraph 7, subsection B. I did. 40 seconds passed. His name lit up on my phone screen. I'll be there Thursday at 9 o'clock, he said. Don't sign anything between now and then. I said I wouldn't. I told Karen I wouldn't be signing anything. She said I'd regret that. I told her I understood. What I didn't tell her was that the sheriff was coming Thursday morning and that he'd already read the paragraph she didn't know existed. The meeting was called for Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock. Emergency session, General Membership Community Clubhouse. The notice went out by email Tuesday afternoon with the subject line that read, Important HOA Enforcement Update. All residents please attend. I read it standing at my kitchen counter, noted the time and subject line in my log, and added it to the folder. I arrived at 6:52. The parking lot was fuller than I'd expected. 43 residents, as best I could count, more than I'd seen at any HOA meeting in recent memory. People had come because the email told them to, and in a neighborhood where the HOA had spent 3 years training residents to show up when summoned, most of them still did. I found a seat in the third row center. I had a yellow legal pad and a pen, nothing else. Earl came in a few minutes later and sat 2 rows behind me. He caught my eye and gave me a small nod. I nodded back. We didn't speak. Karen called the meeting to order at 7:04. She was dressed more formally than usual, dark blazer, the HOA president lanyard. Reading glasses she didn't normally wear at the informational sessions I'd attended over the years. She stood at the front of the room behind a folding table with a microphone that wasn't necessary for a space this size, but that she used anyway. Davis sat to her right. 2 other board members sat to her left. The 5th board member, a woman named Patricia, who had been on the board for 6 years, was absent. Karen noted this for the record without elaborating. This evening's session has been called to present and ratify enforcement action taken by the board in the matter of a violation at 4412 Sycamore Ridge Drive, she said. That's my address. She did not say my name. The board has conducted this action in accordance with the HOA's governing documents and community standards, and we are presenting it tonight for full board ratification and membership notification. She opened her folder. She presented the original violation notice. She presented the seizure authorization, a 1-page document she indicated the board had signed on the morning of the removal. She presented the lien filing record. She presented, and this was the part that required some effort to sit through, a copy of the compliance agreement I had declined to sign, which she described as a reasonable resolution pathway that the property owner has thus far chosen not to pursue. She did not say Section 12. 4 out loud, not once. She referred to it only as the relevant governing provision and the applicable community standard. I wrote that down verbatim with a small asterisk next to it. The HOA's legal counsel has reviewed the board's actions in this matter and confirmed they are consistent with the association's authority under the governing documents, Karen continued. We are asking the board to ratify the enforcement action as taken. Davis moved to ratify. A board member named Henderson seconded. The vote 4 in favor, none opposed, 1 absent. Karen wrote something on her notepad. That was when Earl raised his hand. Karen looked at him with the expression of a teacher who has seen a student raise their hand at the wrong moment. Yes, Earl. Earl stood up slowly, the way a man stands up when his back has been bothering him for a decade, but he's going to stand up anyway. I received a notice a couple months back citing the same provision being discussed here, he said. I'd like to know what section that was and where I can find it in the CC&RS, because several of us have been trying to locate it. And Karen said, her voice smooth and practiced. I appreciate your engagement. What you're describing is a separate enforcement matter and isn't within the scope of tonight's session. The floor tonight is for ratification of this specific action, not for general CC&RS discussion. But if it's the same section, the floor is not open for that item tonight. You're welcome to submit a written inquiry through the HOA's standard process. She smiled at him. Thank you, Earl said. Down. The man who had been about to speak behind him. A younger guy I recognized from the corner lot, the one with the flagpole citation, looked at Earl, looked at Karen, and put his hand down. The room was quiet for a moment in the particular way rooms go quiet when people have something to say and have decided not to say it. Karen moved to her closing statement. Sycamore Ridge, HOA, has consistently enforced community standards equally and without exception. Every resident in this community is subject to the same governing documents and the same compliance expectations regardless of tenure or personal circumstance. Any property owner who believes they have legitimate grounds to challenge a citation is welcome to submit a formal written appeal within 30 days of the original notice date. Until that time, the board's authority in this matter is confirmed, and the enforcement action stands as ratified. She looked up from her notes. She looked directly at me. I looked back. I'd been writing on the legal pad throughout. I set down my pen. I held her gaze for a moment, not challenging, not hostile, just present, just watching. Then I nodded once slightly. She looked back at the room. This meeting is adjourned at 8:47 p.m. Thank you all for attending. People began collecting their things. There was quiet conversation, The scrape of folding chairs, the particular subdued energy of a room full of people who came expecting something and aren't sure what they got. Earl passed me on the way out. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder, just rested it there for a second, and then kept walking without saying anything. The man from the corner lot followed him out without looking in my direction. I sat in my chair for another few minutes after most people had filed out. I looked at my notes. I looked at the front of the room where Karen was talking in low tones with Davis and gathering her materials. Then I stood up, folded the legal pad under my arm, and walked to my truck. Drove home, made sure the manila envelope was where I'd left it on the desk. Set my alarm for 8 o'clock. The sheriff had said 9 o'clock. Karen adjourned the meeting at 8:47 and told everyone the matter was closed. The sheriff was going to be pulling into my driveway in less than 12 hours. She just didn't know it yet. He pulled in at 9:02 a.m. Not the department cruiser, his personal truck, a dark blue F25. Oh? He'd driven for 6 years, but he was in full uniform, badge, utility belt, the whole thing. And he hadn't come alone. His civil process deputy, a younger officer named Reyes, whom I recognized from the county building, stepped out from the passenger side with a clipboard and a body camera already running on his chest. This was not informal. The sheriff had decided sometime between my phone call and Thursday morning that this was going to be on the record. I met them at the door and brought them back to the kitchen table. I'd been up since 6 o'clock. Everything was laid out the same way I'd left it the night before. The folder opened documents in order, the original deed unfolded to paragraph 7 and held flat by a coffee mug on one corner. The sheriff sat down and read. He didn't skim. He read the deed the way I'd read it, slowly from the top of paragraph 7 through the property description, through the county classification reference, all the way down to subsection B. His finger moved along the line as he read it. Deputy Reyes stood to his left and read over his shoulder. When he reached the end of subsection B, the sheriff stopped. He read it again. Then he set his finger underneath the last 11 words of the subsection and looked up at me. Which easement shall not be diminished by subsequent private covenant or association agreement, he said, not reading it aloud for performance, just confirming we were looking at the same thing. That's what it says, I told him. He sat back in the chair. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, not confused, just thinking through something the way a man thinks through something he already knows the answer to and is making sure of the shape of it. They can't touch this equipment, he said, not legally. This easement was recorded in 1987. It's attached to the land. No HOA bylaw can override a recorded county easement, not in this state, not anywhere I know of. He looked at Deputy Reyes, who nodded once and made a note on his clipboard. Then the sheriff picked up the HOA meeting minutes from the October 2022 board session. I'd set them to the right of the deed and read the relevant page without being asked to. His expression didn't change when he got to the vote tally, but he set the minutes down very carefully, as if they were now evidence, because they were. He called Karen at 9:31 a.m. I heard his side of the conversation from across the kitchen table. He identified himself by rank and name, stated he was at my property reviewing a legal matter that required her presence, and gave her the address. He didn't explain further. He hung up when she confirmed she'd be there. She arrived in 18 minutes. Davis was in the passenger seat. I watched them from the front window. Karen got out first. She straightened her blazer before she shut the car door. A small automatic gesture, composing herself, putting the meeting face on. She'd done this walk before. She knew how to walk toward a conflict she'd already decided she'd won. Then she saw the sheriff's uniform. She saw Deputy Reyes. She saw the body camera. She saw the F250 parked behind my truck in the driveway. Something went out of her face. Not everything, not yet, but something. She kept walking. "Sheriff," she said as she came up the driveway. Her voice was still professional, still measured. "I'm glad you're involved. This property owner has been non-compliant with HOA governing standards for." The sheriff held up one hand. He didn't say anything. He just held up one hand, and Karen stopped talking. And he walked to his truck and picked up the original deed from where he'd set it on the hood, folded open to paragraph 7. He carried it to Karen and held it out. "Paragraph 7, subsection B," he said. "Please read it." Karen took the deed. She read. I watched her eyes move across the line. I watched them go back to the beginning and move across it again. A muscle in her jaw shifted. She looked up. The HOA's legal counsel reviewed our enforcement authority and confirmed. The sheriff walked back to his truck. He picked up the October 2022 board meeting minutes and carried them to Karen. He opened them to the page I'd flagged and held them up beside the deed so she could see both at once. Is this the meeting where Section 12.4 was proposed and voted on? Karen looked at the minutes, her mouth open, slightly closed. Davis, who had been standing 4 feet behind her since they arrived, took one step backward, just one. But I noticed it. And I think the sheriff noticed it too, because he glanced at Davis briefly before returning his attention to Karen. Yes or no, the sheriff said. Not unkindly, just clearly. Karen said the vote was procedural. The board has the right to the vote failed. The sheriff said 3-2, and there is no record of a subsequent vote adopting this provision, which means Section 12.4 has never been a lawfully enacted part of your governing documents. The driveway was very quiet. Deputy Reyes was writing on his clipboard. The seizure of this man's tractor. The sheriff continued, his voice level, and unhurried, was conducted under a provision that was never legally enacted against a property that carries a recorded agricultural easement, specifically protecting exactly this type of equipment use. That is unlawful conversion of private property. The tractor needs to be back on this property within 24 hours. All associated fines are void. The lien needs to be withdrawn in full. Karen's hand, the one still holding the deed, dropped slightly. Our attorney, she said, her voice had lost about half its volume. Call him, the sheriff said. I'll wait. Nobody moved for about 4 seconds. Karen did not call anyone. Davis cleared his throat. He looked at the ground, then at his shoes, then at some point in the middle distance that wasn't Karen and wasn't me and wasn't the sheriff. I'll contact the HOA administrator, he said quietly to arrange the return. Karen was still holding the deed. She was looking at it, not reading it anymore, just looking at it the way you look at something when you're trying to understand how it got there. The sheriff reached out and took it from her hands gently, formally, the way you take something back that always belonged to someone else. He walked it over and handed it to me. I put it in the manila envelope. From across the street from the direction of Earl's house, I heard a door open. Earl came down, his front steps slowly stood at the edge of his lawn, and looked at the driveway. Behind him a moment later, the corner lot family, the flagpole people, came out onto their porch. Then another neighbor, a woman I recognized from the meeting last night, stepped out of her car in her driveway and stood with her keys in her hand watching. Davis walked to Karen's car and got in. He did not look back. Karen stood in my driveway alone for a moment. Then she walked to her car, got in, and drove up the street without saying anything else. I watched the white Audi turn the corner. Then I looked across at Earl. He lifted one hand, not a wave, exactly something quieter than that. I nodded. Deputy Reyes closed his clipboard. The tractor came back on Friday morning. 2 men from a private towing company, not the same crew from Monday, different shirts. No HOA logo, pulled the flatbed up to my driveway at 8:15 a.m. and asked me where I wanted it. I told them the same place it had always been, south side of the property, concrete pad near the fence line. They lowered it down, unhooked the chains, handed me a work order stamped no charge, third-party billing to Sycamore Ridge HOA, and left without much conversation. I walked over and pulled the orange tag off the steering column, the one they'd put on it in the maintenance yard. I turned it over in my hands for a moment, then set it on the workbench in the garage. I had things to do. The sheriff's written finding arrived 3 days after Thursday morning. An official document, county letterhead signed and dated, stating that the seizure of property at 4412 Sycamore Ridge Drive had been conducted without lawful authority, that the provision cited Section 12. 4 of the Sycamore Ridge HOA CC&Rs had never been legally enacted by the association's board, and that the property in question carried a recorded agricultural use easement predating the HOA's formation by 16 years, which easement remained valid and enforceable under county land use law. 1 copy went into my folder. 1 copy went to the county clerk's office as a matter of public record. 2 weeks after that, I received a letter from the county district attorney's office informing me that a preliminary inquiry had been opened into HOA enforcement practices in Sycamore Ridge, specifically regarding the pattern of citations issued under Section 12.4 across multiple households. The letter asked if I would be willing to make my documentation available. I sent them the entire folder organized by date labeled by category with the October 2022 meeting minutes on top. The lien on my property was withdrawn and formally expunged from the county record within 72 hours of the sheriff's finding. I checked the parcel record online the morning it cleared. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the screen for a minute. Then, I closed the laptop and made breakfast. The fines were voided, all of them, the $2,800 accumulated against my property, and the smaller amounts collected from the 5 households I documented, Earl's $80, the RV family's $340, the flagpole family's citation, the garden bed, the basketball hoop. The HOA board voted in emergency session to issue full refunds to every household that had paid a citation under Section 12.4 $11,400 in total, dispersed over the following month. Karen's personal legal fees, which apparently had grown considerably once the DA's inquiry opened, were her own to manage. The HOA's insurance carrier opened a separate conduct review of the board's enforcement actions. I wasn't a party to that proceeding, and I didn't follow it closely. Some things you hand off and let the appropriate people handle. Karen was removed as HOA president at the emergency board session the following Tuesday. Davis resigned the same evening before the vote. The motion to remove Karen passed 4-0. The 4 remaining board members, including the 2 who had voted to ratify her enforcement action the previous Wednesday, apparently having reconsidered their positions with some urgency. Karen did not attend the meeting where she was removed. She submitted a written resignation instead, which the board accepted. The new interim HOA president was a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Ose, who had lived in the community for 12 years and had, as it happened, received her own Section 12.4 citation 14 months ago for a decorative rain barrel in her side yard. She'd paid the $40 fine and repainted the barrel. When the board announced her interim appointment at the following general meeting, someone in the back of the room started clapping, and then most of the room joined in. I wasn't at that meeting. Earl told me about it the next day over his back fence. He shook his head when he described the applause, the way people shake their heads at something they find equal parts funny and sad. "Took one of us," he said. I told him I knew. The first week of November, Margaret sent a formal written notice to all Sycamore Ridge residents acknowledging that Section 12.4 had never been a validly enacted provision of the HOA's governing documents, that all citations issued under it had been unlawful, and that the board had committed to a full review of all enforcement actions taken over the preceding 3 years. It was 3 paragraphs plainly worded with no legal hedging and no apology from anyone who actually owed one. But it was something. I folded the notice and put it in the folder, which by then was 2 in thick and lived in the top drawer of my filing cabinet. 3 weeks after the tractor came back, I drove it out to the back fence line on a Tuesday morning and spent 2 hours clearing brush along the drainage ditch. The same work I'd done every fall for 15 years. The back corner of the property had gotten overgrown during the time the machine was in that maintenance yard, and I wanted to get ahead of it before the ground froze. The neighborhood was quiet. A dog barked somewhere up the street and then stopped. The tractor engine was the loudest thing I could hear. When I finished the last row, I idled down and sat for a few minutes. The tree line along the north edge of the property was starting to turn orange and red at the top, still green at the bottom. The sky above it was the particular flat gray of a November morning that could go either way. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, just sitting. Then I drove the tractor back across the property to the south side, backed it onto the concrete pad, and cut the engine. Same spot, same oil stain on the concrete, same fence line, same gravel, same distance from the road. The orange violation notice HOA-2024-118 is framed on the wall of my home office now. I did it as a joke mostly, but it's there. Someone at the county clerk's office at the sheriff's request stamped the back of the notice copy in the official record with a red ink stamp that reads, "Void Unlawful Enforcement, County Record Number 2024-CR-118. I had that side facing out. The original deed is in a new folder in the filing cabinet, not the bottom drawer anymore, front of the top drawer where it's easy to find. I don't expect to need it again, but I know where it is.